Welcome to Weston, a farm museum dedicated to sharing the story of life in rural Fauquier County, Virginia. Before its purchase by British investors in the 18th century, Weston was covered in ancient oak, hickory, and poplar trees. It was a natural place that supported the indigenous people who lived here, as well as an abundance of wildlife amid its hardwood forests, open meadows, and streams, all woven into a gently rolling terrain. The area's potential for growing tobacco and wheat attracted hopeful landholders, many using enslaved individuals and families to work the land. In 1859, Weston would become a family farm when Charles Nurse purchased a little over 400 acres from the Fitzhugh family. Today, Weston is a farm museum and a center of local history and the arts owned by the Warrenton Antiquarian Society and maintained for the residents and visitors of Fauquier County and beyond. Weston and our society invite you to enjoy your visit here, learning about Weston's story and the life, past and present, that we all share.
I've always thought Weston was just a super special place, and frankly unique in that it's not one of these properties like Mount Vernon or Monticello that some grand historical figure owned. But the fact that it has all of its outbuildings intact, and it's not this grand fancy place, but it's a complete collection and really an insight into sort of more ordinary folks of the past that is seldom interpreted in historical properties.
I think the benefits for everyone, but particularly for children, when you can come, you can read about history, but when you can come to a place physically and see history and appreciate in a very real sense what our past was like, it just brings it into much greater focus and makes people appreciate the past.
The Nurse family came to be here when Charles Nurse came down from Georgetown and looked at the property. He wanted a country place that he could farm. Giles Fitzhugh, the Fitzhugh family had owned this land and this property, a good deal of land in this part of the world. Giles died, and in 1859, Charles Nurse bought this place from his niece. Charles and the second, Mrs. Nurse, Annie, they had 4 children, so he could have been their grandfather. He did die when the children were fairly young. Annie Nurse had to support the family, so she started a girls' school in the winter and had a girls' camp in the summer.
Well, there were no recorded battles or skirmishes at Weston, but all around the area there were lots of activity in terms of the Civil War battles. And Weston, as well as most of the farms in the area, suffered significantly. There were both Confederate forces stationed nearby and, for the most part, Union forces.
There were a lot of incidents like that where the troops moved in, took things, ruined things, and then others would come in later and do even more.
Weston's a very important part of the Civil War. Meade had his troops lined up on the railroad from Catlett, which was called Catlett Station, to Warrenton Junction, which is the present Calverton. And then there was a spur line that came to Warrenton. And Union troops lined up along the railroad from Catlett to Calverton, 3 miles, a Union train.
There were soldiers who came to burn the house down, but they didn't because one of the soldiers saw this portrait. There's a portrait of the Virgin Mary holding the baby Jesus. Perhaps he was Roman Catholic, but he said, "We're not burning this house down," so off they went.
The diary of Margaret Nurse, Charles Nurse's first wife, documents a lot of the turmoil during the Civil War. The nurses left Weston in November of 1862, and they left for Pennsylvania, where Charles had a position overseeing an ironworks. Charles and Margaret would not return to Weston for 17 years, and soon after that, in 1883, Margaret passed away. Charles and his second wife, Anne Carroll Simpson, who was a former governess, raised their 4 children at Weston, and it was their oldest and youngest children, Constance, the oldest, and Charlotte, the youngest, who lived their entire lives at Weston. Both Charlotte and Constance were accomplished artists. Many of their hunt scenes, their sculptures and landscapes and floral paintings still adorn Weston's walls. And Charlotte was an avid, popular, and very well-respected horsewoman. She was master of foxhounds of Casanova in the 1920s and 30s.
Casanova Hunt was founded by the local farmers and is very much a community organization. Casanova Hunt needed a place for its kennel, and Charlotte Nurse was very willing to allow the hunt to make Weston its home.
There was a camaraderie in the Casanova Hunt that everybody was pulling to keep the hunt going. And you were hunting over the farmers' territory, or their land, so they all felt invested in the hunt. You know, it was all a part of the hunt. It wasn't, you know, doctors and lawyers that came out on Saturdays. These guys worked their land, and then a lot of times those horses that they were working or were their carriage and buggy horses, those are the horses that they hunted.
For years and years, the farmers would follow along with the hunt in their trucks or on a tractor and had a good time because they loved to hear the hounds and they loved the hunting part and they respected the countryside.
This hunt was documented in a 1930s Fortune magazine article that we have, the antiquarians, reproduced in a book called Jericho Turnpike. And in that book, it talks about Miss Charlotte as being a remarkable character, and she at the time was the master of foxhounds of Casanova Hunt. Though it played no role in the Civil War, almost a century later, Weston and the Nurse Sisters played a very active role in supporting the troops during World War II. They hosted the soldiers that were stationed at Vin Hill, an Army intelligence post, for dinners and respite. And Charlotte also was the manager and host of the Servicemen's Club in Warrenton.
When I was working on a history of Vin Hill, you can't leave Weston out of that because that was so central to the morale of the men that were stationed at Vin Hill during World War II. And the Norse Sisters were such gracious hosts to those men.
Many soldiers came here for an R&R, and they loved Charlotte, and Constance and Liza Red made meals for the soldiers. And right at this dining room table, in this dining room.
Men came out here for a respite. They were welcomed, they were fed. They could have some time to write letters, do whatever they wanted, and really recharge, then go back and do the important work they did there during World War II. The local citizenry here was always eager to do whatever they could to make their tour of duty here as enjoyable as possible. And of course, the top of that would be the Nurse Sisters and what they did here at Weston, because it was very personal and it was very very well managed and much appreciated.
When the Nurse Sisters died, they left house and 10 of the outbuildings to the Warrenton Antiquarian Society, and the rest of the property was given to the state to be used as a wildlife refuge.
Evolution is a word that I use a lot when I think about Weston because it has evolved. It was in such terrible shape when I first came. Really nothing was done here except maintenance until the 60s, but there was a rebirth of preservation and old houses and taking care of them and restoring them. And we at Weston decided to do that. We had 13 outbuildings, all of which needed work. And so we started one by one restoring them. The most recent renovation was the slave farm workers cabin. Before we started working on it, we wanted to get information so that we did it right, because it started off as a slave cabin, was used all the way up until the 60s or the late 50s, was lived in. And so we asked the head of the historic architecture at Mary Washington in Fredericksburg to come, and he brought a pal. And it turns out that the two of them were writing a book on slave cabins in Virginia. And Weston's slave cabin, it was best preserved and the most was known about it. Charles Nurse kept record of everything that was used to build it. It had a foundation, which most slave cabins did not. It had windows, which most slave cabins did not.
People have to take into consideration that not all slave quarters were the same. Some had floors, some didn't. Some had chimneys, some didn't. You just have to look at the landscape of everything and the interpretation of everything and look at the account books, and you see what really happened on a superficial level, because we will never know the true ins and outs of what people endured. But the task or the burden with Weston or other historic sites is to be truthful and to be inclusive in the storytelling. And it's not rewriting, but it is including the history. And that's all that it is. It's just an inclusion of a story once overlooked.
My ancestors worked back here on Weston Farm. My family's property is on the other side of the woods, and that was gifted to us from the Nurse family. I'm glad that it was the Warrenton Antiquarian Society and Ann Van Ryzen. I met them and I came to the open house because she's given me names of family members that I never knew of. The connection, the overlap is giving me insights into my family going back over 150 years. So I'm very grateful that they were digging back here.
As a community resource, Weston has held numerous activities for the community. And those have included a family reunion that attracted hundreds of people from all across the United States, people that were related to a worker who lived at Weston and participated in the Weston community. We've also had displays at our blacksmith shop, which is an operational shop. We've had a rural circus, and of course we've had our annual tea that we host to appreciate all the wonderful people that have supported Weston. Most particularly, Weston has provided a place for school children to come and to learn about life in the 19th and early 20th century. They get to experience the house, they get to experience the kitchen and all the different wares that were used hundreds of years ago, and they get to see and operate some of the old farm machinery so that they sort of understand how things worked before electricity was present.
I brought the students here for a number of reasons. For a while, one of the Virginia SOLs at the first grade level was to teach students about long ago and today. More recently, they changed the SOL to really encompass Virginia and to have the children understand the history of Virginia and how the culture and the environment has changed over the years. So one aspect of that is the long ago portion. And Weston and the docents who work at Weston did a wonderful job of showing the students artifacts, the home, the different outbuildings that really made the history come alive for them. So, you know, we can read books to the children, but for them to come and experience what happened long ago in their own community is really invaluable.
Many of the children live in homes in cities. They've never seen a snake. They don't know what a groundhog is. They don't know that you've got to walk down to the stream to get water. And this becomes a conversation with them, and then they ask questions.
What I admired about the nurses were that they were not only animal lovers and great humanitarians, but they were artists, and they loved the place here. You could tell by the little things that they had done. Every time I drive in here, I think about those two stone gate posts out there. When I first started, there were these beautiful lilies that were daylilies that were planted around those posts. And then the state came out in and improved the road, of course, and killed all the lilies.
It's a special feeling. I can't explain it. You come here and it's very quiet and very soothing. Even when you had hounds barking in the kennel, still very quiet, soothing place.
As an artist, when you go and paint outside, you are looking for the perfect atmosphere and surroundings. But here at Weston, there's a type of energy that it's typical of old historical places. You always feel that energy around you. But the energy here, you can feel that it's positive and it's calm and it's pleasant.
It is very quiet and serene. There's a lovely atmosphere about this place.
Unlike where I live, there's people everywhere because I live right in town, and it's always really loud and a little bit annoying, but you don't have that here because it's so serene.
I would say Weston is very different because because it's much less trafficked. It's not such a big site like Mount Vernon or such other things. It's retained a lot more of its authenticity as being old. All those other places, they've been renovated and such to support more traffic. And Weston has remained very, it hasn't really changed. It looks exactly as I think it would hundreds of years ago.
One of the things that was happening when the antiquarians first started applying to the state and the federal levels for historic designation was that the early era of the historic preservation movement was only looking at properties like Mount Vernon and Monticello, Montpelier, because they had a lot of those kinds of properties, especially in Virginia, to consider. And there was a wealth of historic properties here, so it took them a long time to get around to appreciating something like Weston, which is simply
sort of the second tier.
We started in the 70s, late 70s, writing letters to the state authorities, and we kept on doing it until we got to the point which happened in 1996 that we actually went down to Richmond to hear the proclamation that they had accepted Weston to the Landmarks Register for the state of Virginia and the federal historic landmarks.
One of the things that the sisters mentioned in their papers, in their wills, was they wanted us, the antiquarians, to preserve Weston and show it to other people and not turn it into a museum, but treat it like a museum. They looked far enough down the road to see that it was going to be a treasure.